We're Compound Everything. We talk money, markets, and investing. And today we are discussing Uber and the threats of autonomous vehicles or AVs for Uber going into that market.
So how we came about this topic was we were just in Phoenix. I was at a medical conference in Phoenix. When we were there, we noticed something, and that is Waymo. That was super interesting to see all the Waymo cars just, moving around, and you see all of a sudden this white car pull up with no one in the driver's seat and then people hopping in and out. And that made me think, okay, so what is the impact of something like this on ride sharing and Uber? And it actually got to the point where I think we saw one taxi while I was there.
One that we noticed.
One taxi cab that I noticed. I mean, I wasn't looking for them initially until I saw all these Waymo cars everywhere. And then I really started noticing them. So that made me think, okay, well, what about Uber? Because we started seeing all these Waymo vehicles everywhere and not too many Ubers that I was aware of, or Lyfts or whatever.
I'm going to say we probably saw 10 to 20, and that's a big difference in number, Waymos per one Uber.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe more.
Yeah.
The ratio was crazy.
It was huge. I mean, the Waymos were just everywhere. At least it seemed like it. So that's kind of how this came about. So our long thesis, we're long Uber, and well, I'm long Uber, and by default you're also long Uber. But the thesis behind Uber initially for us was brand recognition, network moat, the fact that they're now turning profitable, and to be honest, I like the CEO Dara, and I can't pronounce his last name. So Dara K is his last name. I'm sorry, Dara, if you ever watch this video, I just can't pronounce your last name.
Yeah. So for people watching, they might think like, how on earth, like, are you just coming to this realization now about Waymo? And the truth is, like, we knew about autonomous vehicles, and we listened to the quarterly shares, and we know about Waymo and all of that. But
heck, we have an autonomous vehicle in a sense,
right?
With our Tesla,
right? So, but where we live, there's no Waymos. That's like not a thing. And so what we couldn't understand until we actually went somewhere that had them was how mainstream it's become and how infiltrated autonomous vehicles have become in places where they allow it, regulatory, in places where they can drive because weather is better, infrastructure is better. For numerous reasons, we don't have something like that here. And then the other thing is, you mentioned that we have a Tesla, so we just couldn't wrap our mind around autonomous vehicles being a thing because the Tesla's full self-drive is so bad that you couldn't pay me to sit in the backseat of our Tesla because we have FSD.
Yeah.
It's gotten a lot better over the years, but you could not pay me to get in the back of our car and be like, okay, it's just going to drive you around. Because Tesla is such an erratic and not predictable driver that it's just way too dangerous. So we were like, what? Autonomous vehicles? We're so far away from that idea. But then when we went to Phoenix, and this just shows you the importance of traveling and going into other places if you know something's taking off. And going to check it out, because it really opened our eyes to like everyone talking about Waymo and how it really is a threat to Uber and autonomous vehicles. We were like, oh wow, like it's like actually a threat to Uber.
Yeah.
And we couldn't really fully wrap our mind around that until we saw it.
Yeah. I am very excited actually after seeing the Waymo vehicles, to the point where I downloaded the app even though we don't have Waymo here. And I did a little bit of cost figuring because when we were in Phoenix, I rented a car. But at the end of it, I was doing some calculations by the time we were there for 4 days, I believe. And by the time I factored in the cost of the vehicle, the cost of insurance, gas, and all those things, I was like, okay, what would it have cost me to just Waymo everywhere we actually drove? Oh, and parking. We had to pay for parking per day at the hotel, which was, I think, $23
American
a day, US, every day,
it's like
to just park the car there. I started figuring, I just thought, well, what would have been the cost for us to just Waymo everywhere we wanted to go as opposed to renting a car and driving? I mean, that does limit your access a little bit because Waymo, one of the downsides, and we'll get to this maybe a little later, is Waymo is geofenced. So that means that they only have certain areas in Phoenix that they can actually travel. And it shows that on the map when you download the Waymo app. So I downloaded the Waymo app. And the cost for us to go from the airport to our hotel was $23 US. At that time that I checked. And it would have taken about 10 minutes for the Waymo vehicle to arrive, to pick us up at our destination. It would have been about a 20-minute drive, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, to the airport itself.
And you have to account for time because it took us an hour to rent our car.
Yes, there was a lineup to get the car.
There was a huge lineup, which was super frustrating because you're just, you're tired after traveling. You and I already do not like air travel because of the slow process of everything and sitting around and you're wasting your time and everything like that. And so there was also the time factor because we could have just got a Waymo, not worried about it. And then of course coming back to the airport, you have to drop it off, the rental car off. But if you have a Waymo, you just get in now. Now I guess that could be said. Well, the same could been said for Uber. So why didn't you guys just get an Uber? But there's just something about not having a driver that I prefer.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's just if I could have a car that doesn't have a driver, I would just way prefer that.
Yeah, oh, for sure. I think in that scenario, we did the calculations and we figured, the $23 drive to and from the airport, so that's about $46. And the amount of driving we actually did while we were there, the total cost for us to rent the vehicle while we were there was somewhere around $500 once you put insurance and all that. $500 US to rent the car for 4 days while we're there, which isn't cheap by the time you figure in taxes and, all in gas, etc. Parking, as I mentioned. And the cost for us to do all the driving that we had done and take a Waymo would have been about half.
Yeah.
So it would have cost us half the amount of money to take a Waymo to all our destinations and not actually have impacted the amount of driving we did versus renting the car. Mm-hmm. So we actually would have come out ahead. So that led us to think, oh, wow. So this is actually a bearish thesis, not only for ride-sharing apps necessarily like Uber, but also for potentially car rental companies, Budget and Alamo and Hertz and all them. So we thought, whoa, this could be a real game changer.
So we started really pontificating on Uber because I think your position is fairly large.
It's decent size, and it's actually appreciated considerably since I bought it. Yes. I think I bought it I know I bought it in around the 20s.
Yeah. So, and like I said, of course we knew about AVs, and of course, and here's the thing. We say that it's we're looking into it and listening to people online and really taking into account, but you still can't take it into account quite as much until you see it. There's just something in the human brain that until you see it, you don't fully believe it.
Yeah. There was a point where Uber had dipped, and I think a lot of the narrative was because of autonomous vehicles, and people foresaw that these were probably going to be an issue and potentially disruptive for Uber's business.
And that makes sense because not most people, but people in Texas, California, Phoenix, all those places could see it.
Yes.
But you go other places, you just can't see it even though you know it exists. You don't see it in the same way. So we were really pontificating on Uber and we're thinking what does this mean for Uber? Is this going to be a thing? Will people just start downloading the Waymo app? And of course, other cars, I think GM has Cruise. Is that
yes,
right?
Correct.
So there's other car companies that have AVs and they're not going to necessarily want to run an app.
Yeah.
Right. So then we thought, okay, well, how does this look for Uber? How much market share is Waymo? Then there's, of course, a partnership between, I think in Austin, they're only coming out. Waymos are only offered on the Uber app.
Yeah.
I think, is that how it goes?
I believe so.
So that's kind of where we're going today. We're going to go through what we've been thinking on, talking about, mulling over, reading about, and then try to give our overall thesis. Are we staying long? Are we adding more? Are we trimming?
Yeah.
All of that.
Well, and some of this came around because Bill Ackman just revealed that maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so, Bill Ackman just revealed that he's been accumulating shares of Uber. Mm-hmm. So I don't recall exactly when that announcement was, but he's started to take, Bill Ackman, of course, being the chief investor at Pershing Square, and usually a brilliant value investor, he sees a definite long thesis for Uber. And so he predicts that it's going to generate significant returns for his portfolio. And I thought that was a great thing when I saw it come around. But then when we saw the Waymos coming around in Phoenix, when we were actually in Phoenix and actually able to visualize that, it made me question the wisdom of that investment and the wisdom of my own investment from that perspective. And so, there's a few things when you start to consider that. So the first thing with Uber is that, of course, it's a ride-sharing app. So the ride-sharing app of Uber has a lot of significant advantages. It's got scale. It has a huge user base of millions. So it's definitely got network advantages to it. And they've also kind of figured out logistics. Mm-hmm. So they've figured out how to manage kind of peak times and when to, how to control, or I don't want to say, the word's not manipulate, but how to
navigate
the whole driver and rider
They've put in the birthing. They've gone through the birthing pains.
And they've done it for a
And
decade
they've done
or
it
more.
well. And they've run into, they went through a time where people were like, it took an hour for my Uber driver to get here. And I don't even want to get an Uber. I'm just going to get a taxi. That was a little while back. And they've put in that effort there. So they do have like a very great technology, a very great app.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that. A while back, I was in another Canadian city. I was doing some business there. And this was before really I knew a lot about Uber. That had to be 7 years ago now. And I ordered
It's just funny like how far behind we are in using things because it's just nothing comes to where we live. Like we're just so far. By the time something's like pretty mainstream in other places, it's just starting to enter into our area.
Well, and it's funny you say that because at the time I had ordered a cab and I waited an hour for my cab, but someone else who was at that site with me doing the exact same thing I was ordered an Uber and they were gone within 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, Uber really revolutionized travel in that respect and really disrupted the taxi
which is
industry.
why you went long.
Which is why I went long.
But then, of course, business changed. So now the question is Uber going to get disrupted?
Right. And I think, so Uber, in a sense, has distinct advantages. They have the name recognition. I mean, it's become part of the vernacular. I'm just going to Uber there.
Yeah, no one says I'm going to get a cab.
No one really says I'm going to Lyft.
No,
you know what I mean?
That's even less. Yeah.
So from that perspective, Uber has name brand recognition. They're branching in to other areas aside from ride sharing. So they have the ride sharing, which everyone knows them for, but they're also into food delivery service. So Uber Eats. They're also getting into freight and logistics, is my understanding. Although that's less part of their business. Hopefully it will increase because I see that as a very fragmented industry. And I think they're even trying to get into almost, I don't want to say courier service, but like sidewalk delivery and things like that. So they're trying to become like an all-in-one logistics, people moving, parcel moving, item moving company. So we've been talking about the advantages, but that brings in some uncertainty because with this autonomous vehicle kind of revolution that's going on, they're not going to be the same business that they are now.
And that was the biggest thing for us is we were talking about, we're like, we don't think Uber's going anywhere, but are we going to be invested in the same business that you were invested in when you bought it at $20? Because businesses change and you might not be invested in the same business. And sometimes they pivot bigly and they do something completely different. And sometimes BlackBerry is an example of that.
Yes.
Right? They're still floundering, but like they're not even the same company, even though they bear the same name.
Yeah.
And sometimes they just pivot. They're in the same industry, but they're not the same company. And a good example of that right now is Nike. Nike is not the same company in the 90s and the early 2000s as it is today. It's just different. So that was our question. Are we still invested in Uber as we know it? Or are we invested in Uber as a new company? If it's a slightly different company or going to be, is that the type of company that we want to go into? And of course, they know autonomous vehicles are coming for them because
they've known that for years.
They had an AV division themselves.
Yes, that's correct.
They were developing AVs knowing that was the future of rideshare.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So what they did back in, I think in around 2016, 2018. Now, one of the things that happened for Uber, unfortunately, is they were involved in the first autonomous vehicle fatality.
Yes.
So it was one of their cars that hit a pedestrian in Arizona, actually. Killed them. And it was a fatal accident. And so that, I think, rocked Uber and led to them...
the autonomous vehicle world because people got really skeptical now about... Which, I get it, but at the same time, like, I don't get it because, like, how many... And I'm not making this the death of this person. Like, I'm not saying,
don't belittle that, of course.
I'm not belittling that, but how many people die every day in a car crash because of a human driving?
Oh, as a physician, I've seen numerous people be hit by human drivers. I've been hit by a car myself, actually. That's right, I forgot about that. I'm not sure how I forgot about that. Thankfully, I was fine and I walked away.
Your bike wasn't okay.
But my bike was not okay.
But like, it was just interesting to me when I was reading through the legalities of that and people's like reactions and all of this. And I read somewhere, I can't remember, this was years back, I don't remember the book, but it stuck with me just because you're a physician. And so we see AI coming into medicine. We see robotics coming into medicine. And so that's probably because you and I always talk about this and you love it. You're like, this is going to be like
I love
huge,
technology.
Yeah, like medicine should have been disrupted years ago and all of
Hands
that.
down.
But it stuck with me because it was talking about robotics for surgery and how humans don't like that and how it's really scary for humanity to wrap their mind around that. And it said like there was a death. I don't know what the robotics machine is or what the company was, but there was a death on the surgery table. Something happened.
That happens, even in human hands.
Right. And it said the interesting thing is if you actually looked at the percentages of death for this particular surgery done by doctors versus done by the machine, the death count was way less for the machine, but there was way more outrage for the machine. And the reason is because you cannot be empathetic towards a machine as a human. Whereas when a doctor makes a mistake, you tend to be more empathetic because it's a human that, right? Of course, like there's human error and there's all these reasons and whatnot. And that just ran through my head as I was reading that story because I was like, man, so many people like cause injury, death, all these things driving, and no one would ever think like, oh, we should stop letting humans drive and every car should be AV. Like, but we go the opposite way when there's an autonomous vehicle accident. We no more autonomous vehicles, only human drivers.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that begs the question, really, what is the acceptable collision and fatality rate reduction for autonomous vehicles versus human drivers, right? That is a societal question that I guess we have to answer. But going back to the 2018 incident and what it means for Uber, is Uber, I think, really, I guess, took that in a sense, and they were forced. There's a few things that actually happened in 2018 to Uber that forced them to divest their autonomous vehicle segment. Because as we mentioned, they were deep in the AV industry. Like they were trying to get their own autonomous vehicles and whatnot.
Which shows you they know it's coming. They
know it's coming.
They were trying to get ahead.
Yeah.
And you as an investor didn't like when they divested.
Correct. Yeah. And so we'll explain the strategy a little bit because having researched a little bit more, it kind of starting to make a little bit more sense. So that happened around that time. And then around the same time, I'm not entirely sure the particulars, but Uber was sued by Waymo because of patent infringement is my understanding. And I think the crux
information
infringement.
Like,
I think what happened is some software person or someone secrets were shared that shouldn't have been shared from Waymo to Uber by somebody.
Yeah.
And so long story short, Uber gets sued and Waymo gets equity in Uber. So which isn't actually bad from that perspective. And then around that same time, there also starts to be increased legislation that goes on.
It's a perfect storm around Uber's AV division.
Yeah. So at that point, like legislators start to come down hard on the AV perspective. And that goes back to what we said before. What margin of error are you going to allow machines to have versus human drivers? You know, if there's...
And those are ethics questions.
Those are ethics
questions.
Those
are difficult questions to answer. Yeah. And it's going to, in my opinion, it's going to take people a long time to figure that out.
That's right.
Because these are now ethic questions, not business questions.
Right. Yeah. And that's a societal ethics question. Anyway, beyond the scope of our discussion.
Yes. And you always have the tech haters too, where it will be like, they just don't want it. They don't like it. They have a romantic idea of living in the Stone Ages and staying where you are and never progressing.
Right. Around that time, that's all kind of what ended up happening around 2018. Also, the autonomous vehicle segment was hemorrhaging money. So at this point, Uber decides to divest that part of their business, and they sold it to Aurora. So Aurora, I can't remember. Aurora Innovations, I think it's
AUR is the ticker.
Yeah. So Aurora Innovations. When I just checked this morning, they're about a 10 billion market cap company. And so they're into autonomous vehicles for freight and logistics is my understanding. Having not looked deeply into that part of things, I probably should have done that for not only this video, but as a shareholder of Uber. They own about a 26% stake, 26%.
It's pretty big. So if Aurora fumbles, that's going to be a huge write-down.
It will be.
And we hate, there's nothing more frustrating than going into a company and having asset
write-downs.
Oh, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, that happened with Kraft Ties.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. But anyways, go on.
Anyways, so they now hold an equity stake in Aurora Innovations. And so they've divested that part. So they're no longer on the hook for the R&D expense and the large we'll call it infrastructure expense that comes along with being in autonomous vehicles itself. But the argument is now that Uber has equity stakes in Aurora, and I'm not sure, but I think they at least have partnerships with other autonomous vehicle.
Yeah, like Dara knows where the ball's going.
Yeah, and I think 14 autonomous vehicle companies they have at least partnerships with in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, because they know the business is changing, and they know Uber is not going to be Uber of 5 years ago is not going to be the same Uber 5 years from now.
Correct.
Right. And that's fine.
It's an evolving business.
Businesses evolve, and that's where your management matters.
Yeah.
Because like we can look at Kodak, we can look at Blockbuster, where they refuse to evolve because they thought like Blockbuster especially, right? Blockbuster. They were like, no one's going to want to watch movies on their phone.
Right.
And whatnot.
So the fact that the leader, the captain, the CEO actually acknowledges that this is a potential threat, and not only a threat, but an existential threat, and they need to get on board with getting in there somehow, is reassuring.
Yeah.
As a shareholder.
For sure.
Yeah. Now, Uber is in the position where they don't necessarily have to bleed money out in the R&D expense, but still have the potential upside for autonomous vehicles in some way, shape, or form,
and to be the platform that people use to get these. They're what they're doing is building relationships, so that they can be the platform.
The thesis at current with Uber is that yes, autonomous vehicles are coming, and this is from Dara himself, the CEO, is that autonomous vehicles are coming, but they think that it's probably going to be a hybrid model for a time, at least for a time, wherein there's going to be a marriage, in a sense, between autonomous vehicles and human drivers.
Yeah, ride sharing.
As
it is now.
As it is. And so autonomous vehicles are definitely coming, but they're not going to be able to be deployed at scope for at least
a while. And one of the reasons for that is because, and this was very interesting to me, it's regulation, which we knew, except that it's regulation in that it's not federally regulated in America. It's regulated state to state.
Which is fascinating.
Which was fascinating to me. So it's much like the cannabis industry.
Yes.
So it's just very like fragmented and difficult to navigate because of that. And for cannabis companies, it's difficult because, every state is different. But I think it's even more difficult for these autonomous vehicle companies because every state regulates it differently. Every state regulates it at a different time. So you have to know the laws and the regulations of every single state, and they are all different. California has a lot more regulation, and then there's some states that don't even have it.
Right.
So that's a lot of legalities that they have to be involved in. Mm. So one thing that was said was they're really pushing for a federal regulation across the whole country,
which would make sense.
Yeah, because it will get there eventually because we are going the way of autonomous vehicles. So they're really pushing that because it would make it much easier for them to do that. Mm-hmm. At the same time, if Uber is navigating all of these rules and regulations, a lot of these car companies are just going to partner, AV vehicles and companies will probably, in my opinion, want to partner with Uber so that they don't have to be the ones looking into all these different regulations and laws because Uber will have taken care of that and they'll know where the geofenced areas are, because that actually has to do a lot with regulation, not necessarily with Waymo and Phoenix. No, it's regulation that it has to be.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the autonomous vehicle's capability, but where it's allowed to go.
Yes, and so again, Uber's just changing, and even with Waymo, people might be wondering what is their partnership with Uber? And really, Uber is the one who takes care of the charging, takes care of the fleet, takes care of the looking after the cars and cleaning them, and Waymo just kind of provides for them. In my opinion, Uber divesting, the more I think about it, these cars are expensive. I think it said north of $200,000 per car.
For a Waymo vehicle, yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And now Uber gets itself out of that. And now all of a sudden the margins get fatter again.
Right. So I think in a sense, Uber's play to divest their autonomous vehicle segment was a wise move at the time because they were bleeding money. Now there's really, from my view, and even in my own mind, we were talking about this before we even researched it, there's really two different segments or two different paths that Uber can go, and they're very divergent. So right now we're almost at a crossroads, in my opinion, for Uber.
And this is kind of our final destination after this was where we ended it in our own conversation. Okay, we've got to decide which one they're taking because or what will happen. We've got to kind of foresee it.
Yeah. So on the one hand, I mean, you have these autonomous vehicle producers. So current players would involve Waymo, GM with their Cruise vehicles, and the other player would be Tesla, of course. And
we haven't even touched on that.
Yeah, we haven't even touched on that yet. So Tesla, well, let's touch on that briefly. So Waymo's model is to own the vehicles. Now we're talking north of $200,000 per vehicle,
which will come down, but
which
not
will
right
likely
away.
come down.
But not right
now
away.
Those Waymo vehicles have very advanced technology on them. They have LiDAR, they have cameras, they have radar,
which also makes them very ugly. But
which makes them less than attractive. And I haven't been in one yet, unfortunately. Yeah. We never got the chance to go actually into a Waymo. We should have done it.
We just didn't want to. We didn't want to be stuck in the car when it was so beautiful, though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Again, if we plan to go back to Phoenix maybe in the fall, so we'll do that then. So with Waymo, their plan is to build, develop, and operate these vehicles. And currently they have that partnership with Uber where you can either order a human-driven vehicle or an autonomous vehicle, which makes sense. And some people are actually afraid. When we come home and talk about that, some people are like, oh, I'd never get into an autonomous vehicle, right? So that's their model. So their model is to do that. And then some people think actually what may end up happening with Waymo is Google which Waymo is of course Google, and Google has very deep pockets, which we know, and can afford to spend all this money on R&D. And so the thought is that Waymo may end up being divested or hived off of Google at some point if it gets up and running, which would make
that's just
would make a lot of sense. Anyway,
Google hasn't come out and said that.
No, Google has not said that, but that's kind of some thinking.
What we do know is that the Uber CEO has come out and said Tesla will not use Uber.
That's correct.
That we do know. So let's go on to Tesla, because you were saying this is the way Waymo's going. So how is Tesla going?
So Tesla's model will be to develop their own self-driving, which they're doing. We know that, but would be to allow owners of Teslas, so like us who own a Tesla and have the full self-driving functionality on it, to be able to lease their car or rent their car or whatever you want to call it.
Essentially, we'd be Uber drivers without having to do the driving.
That's right. So our car would be able to be used during off-time hours as a ride-sharing vehicle on Tesla's own app, which they have not yet released.
Right. And like I said before, I don't know what is happening behind the scenes at Tesla, but according to our car right now, there is no way there's no way it could even functionally get out of our driveway in reverse and back up. Yeah. And I would be a little bit not wanting to put it out, not because of who's going in my car, not because I don't want to share it, but Tesla does not go around potholes. And if you know anything about the province we live in, we have swallow your car potholes that you have to avoid or it's getting wrecked.
Yes.
Yesterday it almost ran a red light. You had to slam on the brakes.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Because there was a motorcycle in front of us and it was watching, and it had the red lights on the side.
Yes.
So it was getting confused between the lights, and it was literally.
So I had to stop the car itself.
So I can't imagine. I mean, maybe. But when we followed the Waymo, there was a definite difference between how good it drove compared to how good. Now,
they were good drivers.
Maybe if our Tesla was in Phoenix,
might be different.
It could just be where we are at. Like I said, we take a long time to actually get to the same place. Yeah. Some of these other.
But even basic functions on the Tesla, like you were alluding to, are still not fully developed.
No, and
you'd think that it should be.
It should be fully developed. And the other day, even there's a software update, and we went to go drive. All our cameras were disengaged.
Yeah, our cameras shut down. I'm not sure why.
We didn't have a single one working.
No.
So what happens if now we're behind the wheel, so we can just drive it. What happens now with Tesla, you rent out your car on the Uber app, and all of a sudden someone's in the back seat and the cameras go out.
Right, or it picks somebody up and now the cameras don't work.
Right, because it stopped.
Because it stopped, right?
Yeah,
we put it into park and we disengaged it, and then all of a sudden we go to drive again and the cameras
don't work. And that's been happening more frequent now.
Yes.
With some of their
That never
updates.
happened before, funny enough.
Anyway. That's a more frequent thing.
That's a bit of an aside.
What my point is that unless there's something huge going on at Tesla behind the scenes, I just can't, as a Tesla owner with FSD, I cannot foresee those Robotaxis being ready within the next 2 years. Yeah. At least they need more time than that.
Yeah, I concur with that. And ultimately, I'm of the opinion that autonomous vehicles and that autonomous functionality, full self-drive, whatever the heck you want to call it in these various vehicles, will be included like cruise control.
Oh, yeah.
Eventually, it'll be as ubiquitous as cruise control in vehicles. Like, I'm old enough, unfortunately, to remember when my parents actually had to install cruise control. My dad was a little forward thinking. He actually installed a manual cruise control into our truck.
That's so funny.
But now that you don't buy vehicles anymore that don't have cruise control or adaptive cruise even at this point.
Yeah. And I'm convinced when our youngest children have children and we're grandparents, they're going to be shocked that we drove cars.
Oh, no question.
They're going to be like, it's crazy that people drove. Like, what were they thinking? That's so dangerous having humans behind the wheel.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, it's all going to happen. It's just that I think Elon Musk, he's a visionary. We have talked about this several times between the two of us. He has these grand ideas and he over-delivers. That's his...
Over-promises.
Yes. He over-promises. That's kind of like his way.
Yeah.
Because he's a visionary. But there is no way what he says is going to be ready. It's never ready on time.
Not in the timeline he gives.
Yeah, and every time he announces something and then Tesla stock goes up, I always chuckle because I'm like, have we not learned that he over-promises?
Yeah. I mean, that's been our experience and observation from Tesla. So, and like you said, unless there's a huge update, which is entirely possible, like a lot of this is just software. And speaking on that for a moment, Tesla has taken a very different and divergent approach to autonomous vehicles that Waymo has. So Elon Musk has come out and said, well, we're not going to put LiDAR on our vehicles, LiDAR being, laser kind of functionalities and whatnot, because it's very expensive. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, I don't know. But the Waymo vehicles seem to have that and seem to be clocking a lot of autonomous, like probably millions of miles at this point with this kind of software. So unless Tesla gets a move on, they're maybe falling behind in a sense.
Now, I have read conflicting opinions on that. A lot of people out there think that Tesla is doing the right thing with only the camera technology because there are certain things that like LiDAR won't catch, and they just have to work on making their camera technology better. So there is an argument that, and I don't understand all that, but there is an argument that the camera technology is actually the right way to go for the future.
Right.
But that's a
different discussion.
So with Uber, what is our final kind of like, where are they going? Where you said we're at a crossroads as to what they are going to be in the future, who they're going to become. Are they going to be still profitable? Are they still going to be able to manage these fat margins?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the theory for you?
So our thesis at this point is Uber is not going to be the same company in 5 or 10 years from now that it is right now. And I think I can share your opinion as well, but that we're at a crossroads with Uber and autonomous vehicles. And there will be no question that it will impact their top line and probably bottom line in that respect, one way or another. There's no question about that. And it could go either two ways. Now, with any business, there are intrinsic factors or factors within the business's control that will make or break a business. So the leadership, how well they execute, their promotions and things like that. And then there's extrinsic factors, things that are not in the business's control that will impact their destiny.
And those are a little harder to predict.
Yeah. So I think at this point, having summarized and looked at a lot of different information on it, Uber's fate will be sealed on really one thing, and that is how many players are going to be in the autonomous vehicle space. Is there going to be a few, or will there be many? So is it really going to be only Waymo and Tesla and Cruise, or is there going to be many, many others? Because if it's the first one, then probably what will happen is you're going to get Waymo, which currently runs its own app, but also partners with Uber for now. They will probably end up just running their own app because in a sense, it would be easy for people to just download, 2 or 3 apps and cost compare when they're there. But if you have a significant number of players, all these vehicles, as we mentioned, are working on this problem. If we're correct and autonomous vehicle capability becomes as ubiquitous as cruise control in vehicles, then there will probably be multiple players. And
pretty much every
vehicle, like the Toyota and Honda, and every Rivian, like all these guys will probably want to offer some form of ride sharing with their autonomous vehicle capability. And in that scenario, they're going to need a broker. And that broker will probably be Uber.
So essentially, just to sum that up quickly, if there's only one or two like Waymo or Tesla, Uber might flounder because they're going to be like, why would we be giving any of this to Uber, right? Especially if Waymo were to spin off. Of course, that's all speculation. But if there's 25, 30 different autonomous vehicle companies, no one's going to download 25 or 30 different apps.
No.
They're just going to go in. So what you're saying is there's a good chance that Uber becomes the Airbnb for rideshare.
I think that's probably the way that'll go, most likely.
And I think Dara sees it going that way too, from what he has said here and there.
The question is now, can they execute that? And
Can they stay the app that everyone wants? Can they maintain these partnerships? Can they be the one that offers the best? And I think they can be, because offer the best experience for the user, where the car shows up exactly when it said it was going to show up. It takes like all of those things have to line up. There is a lot behind that app that happens for you to have a seamless Uber pickup and drop off.
That's right.
And Uber's already got all that down.
Yes.
They've been working on it.
So initially, I guess to summarize, when we went to Phoenix and saw the Waymos and whatnot, it really made me question the Uber thesis. And I still have some questions in mind. So this is definitely not, in my opinion, ironclad. I would not put a huge part of my portfolio into it at this point.
Based on this conversation.
Based on this conversation.
Well, we only touched on the AV vehicle rideshare. We didn't touch on Uber Eats and logistics, and
Correct.
That's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah. Not only that, you also have competition with other rideshare platforms, mostly being Lyft in the US. But now there's other ride-sharing apps. I mean, in China, there is no Uber presence. It's Didi, and I think there's one other one.
Now they do have a stake.
They do have a stake in Didi, so which is interesting in and of itself. But they've tried to develop stakes in other rideshare companies in other countries as well.
And they're also not only in the U.S., right? They're in Abu Dhabi and...
Oh, they're worldwide.
They're worldwide, yeah.
So that in itself becomes, an interesting proposition. But the U.S., of course, being the largest market out there.
Dara has said himself, I think this was in the most recent quarterly call, maybe, or it's been in a recent one, that he foresees the autonomous vehicle industry becoming a $1 trillion industry,
which is huge,
only in the US. $1 trillion only in the US. So if Uber can come out as the number one app for these AV companies
in a $1 trillion industry,
only in the US, a $1 trillion industry, total addressable market, only in the US, then they have the potential to really continue to grow.
Yeah.
And I said to you, I was like, at this point, Uber has proven itself as a tech company. Yeah. They've done a really good job with their app. They've done a really good job at making ride sharing seamless. At this point, though, in the game, I think what you're doing is betting on the jockey.
You're betting on the jockey, and you're taking a risk with a binary outcome.
In our opinion.
In our opinion, it's very likely to be a binary outcome. It's not likely to stay the same as it is at current.
Yeah. And who was it that said they said they like companies where there doesn't have to be one winner, where there can be several winners and they can all be profitable? And I think maybe I don't think there has to be one winner here, but what you want as an investor is you still want yours to be the best.
Yes.
Right? There's a lot of energy drinks. You want to be in the best one.
Right, exactly.
Right?
That's right. That you want to be the top 2 or 3 for sure. Preferably the top one.
Yeah, so that's the question.
Yeah. So obviously we haven't exhausted this discussion completely, but I think we've touched on a lot of the main points. In summary, I think Uber is and autonomous vehicles is just a fascinating industry. I love technology, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. I think, again, Uber is going to be a binary outcome. Either it will sink or it will absolutely flourish, depending on how the autonomous vehicle revolution is handled by that company. Yeah. So I think we'll leave it there, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I love autonomous vehicles because I hate driving.
I know you do. So, and actually, I like autonomous vehicles for the highway.
Right. And I love autonomous vehicles even for ride sharing, because for me, like, if I had the choice of having a driver or no driver, I'd pick no driver. I'm bullish AV, and I am actually bullish Uber, because I think Dara's doing a fantastic job. And like I said, there's other avenues and whatnot that they're going into, which as an investor, you would have to do a deep dive in those as well. But we really wanted to talk about the AV part and the ride sharing part as people who live in a place that is not forward thinking and is not tech forward and is very much just kind of stuck in the early 2000s. And we wanted to come at it from that and say, look, there's a whole world out there that is very different than that. And when you're investing, you have to be aware of everything going on, not just your own little community.
I mean, still here we have, more taxis than Ubers.
Yes.
Which is actually
even though people
insane.
say, the funny thing is everyone says, oh, I'm going to get an Uber, but most of the time what they actually mean is they're going to call a cab.
That's right. So we're almost like 2 steps behind.
We're stuck. We're stuck at it reminds me we're just kind of the 2000s, the 2010s. Probably we're stuck in 2010. Yeah. The 2010s came here and then it's just boom, we stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Not sure why. But anyway, that's another discussion. But it brings up a very good point is as an investor, you have to be cognizant and aware of what's going on worldwide. And from our perspective,
and it's in the main market of the company. Canada is not the main market for Uber.
Yeah. And from our perspective, it's best to actually experience it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Your brain can your brain can psychologically wrap its mind better around it when you see it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why the Bible says, blessed is he who believes and has not seen.
That's right.
Right? Because the Lord knew, we need to see things.
That's right.
We need to see things to believe it.
That's right.
Yeah. I think we'll wrap it up here. So if you can like and subscribe this video, that really helps. And we will be back in a week or 2 or 3.